My name is Virginia Scarlett. I'm coming from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I'm going to be telling you about a multi-campus survey that we conducted of open source contributors at UC. So, oh, that's not the right slide. What is happening? Okay. Um, all right, so I'm speaking to you on behalf of the University of California OSPO network. So you might not be familiar with this term OSPO. It stands for Open Source Program Office. The first OSPO was created at Google in 2004. There were other OSPO-like departments cropping up at large tech companies around that time, but Google was the first to call itself an OSPO. And OSPOs are essentially a department that supports open source activities at their organization. So typical OSPO functions include developing open source policy and strategy, overseeing software license compliance, and advising on open source best practices. This is in an industry context. A recent survey from the Linux Foundation found that 77% of the large companies they surveyed have an OSPO. So this is a pretty common thing in industry. However, OSPOs in academia are a relatively new phenomenon. The first academic OSPO was established at Johns Hopkins University in only 2019, and there are maybe around 25 academic OSPOs worldwide that we know of, according to the Curios network of OSPOs. And so there are a lot of ways that universities can benefit from the OSPO model. So just a few examples of how OSPOs can foster open source at the university include offering, direct grants or helping PIs prepare their grant proposals. OSPOs can develop open source educational materials and resources. They can contribute to community building and organizing events and hackathons. They can advocate for more recognition for open source on campus. And this is just a short list of the things OSPOs can do. So the UC OSPO network is a really unique system. We are a multi-campus statewide network of OSPOs. So currently it consists of the 6 UC campuses shown here, but we certainly hope that in the future all UC campuses will have an OSPO and be part of this network. Currently the project has 2 years of funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, but we're looking for ways to establish these OSPOs as permanent institutions on their campuses with a permanent source of funding. And the idea of bringing together these OSPOs in a network is that we can maximize our impact by sharing knowledge and resources across campuses and not be reinventing the wheel or siloed. So why did the UC OSPO network conduct a survey in its first year of existence? Several reasons. One is that we wanted to develop our mission and priorities and make sure that we're delivering services that open source contributors want. It also helps with policy advocacy. We might have kind of a gut feeling for what contributors want, but it's nice to have hard data to say, look, the people have spoken. We also wanted to discover open source activity happening on campus, and we wanted to use this as a community building instrument where people can learn that the OSPO exists, check a box to sign up for our mailing list, and that sort of thing. But I was told that this was a 20-minute talk, so I'm going to give a 20-minute talk. I think the schedule said it's supposed to be longer. So today I'm only going to have time to tell you about this first goal, about developing our mission and our priorities, and the survey as a needs assessment for the campus community. So this is not the first open source survey by any means. It's not even the first academic OSPO survey. The one that I'm most familiar with is this one developed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they have a really cool website where you can explore their data. We decided to create our own survey instrument for a couple of reasons. One is that we wanted to focus on the contributors, not so much the users of open source software on campus. And we really emphasize discovery. So I'm not going to talk too much about that in this talk, but we asked a lot of questions about where do you share your code? Where do you contribute? How often do you contribute? What kinds of contributions do you make? So we really wanted to hear from the contributors who we consider our key stakeholders. So before I launch into the survey results, I'm gonna let you see who's answering these questions. But before I can do that, I have to give a disclaimer, which is that our sampling strategy was opportunistic and ad hoc. We don't have a mailing list for all the UCs. We just had to kind of, do you know someone in this department who can forward the survey email? So the participation rates you're going to see do not necessarily reflect enthusiasm for open source. It's sort of who was in our social network. So in the end, we got 233 experienced open source contributors to respond to our survey and 61 aspiring contributors. These are folks who have not yet contributed to open source but would like to do so in the future. These are the campuses that they came from. So as you can see, we got a lot of responses from UC Santa Barbara and UCLA, and the whole thing is kind of weighted toward the campuses where there is an OSPO or a burgeoning OSPO. And so, again, this is just not a result in itself, just letting you know who took the survey. When we looked at the job categories of the folks who took the survey, we found that about 1/3 of the respondents were non-research staff. These were primarily IT folks and folks who work in instructional design or libraries or other academic support. And the remaining 2/3 were academics, so students, teachers, and researchers. And you can see that slice of postdocs and undergraduates is a little small. Focusing on the academics, we asked them what field of study they come from broadly, and we found that 86% of them came from STEM fields, and the other 14% were social sciences and humanities, and about half of those STEM folks were from math and computer science. So in summary, in our data set, UCSB and UCLA were relatively overrepresented. Undergraduates, humanities, and social sciences were somewhat underrepresented. We only heard back from 7 experienced undergraduate open source contributors. Okay. I thought I had another bullet there. I do not. So let's get into the results. First, we asked folks why they contribute to open source. And here's the result of that question. So the number 1 response was to improve the tools in my field. The second most popular response was also about tools. It was to customize existing tools to my specific needs. Giving back to the community was also high on the list. And doing my job or building a network of peers were less popular answers. As an aside, we also noticed some interesting trends in the motivation data set. One thing we found, which is perhaps unsurprising and perhaps slightly depressing, was that the frequency with which respondents felt motivated by a desire to improve their skills declined as their academic career stage advanced. We also found that academics were significantly more likely to say they were motivated because by the fact that developing open source products is part of my job. So only about 21% of IT folks said that open source was part of their job, whereas 50% of academics saw that it was their job. So in summary, you see open source contributors are motivated by a variety of factors. The top motivation was to improve the tools in one's field, and in some cases, motivations differed significantly between job categories. Next, we asked folks about the challenges they faced and how often they faced them. In looking through the data, I found that some challenges were widespread, whereas others had a large proportion of non-applicable responses. So I decided to do some k-means and PAM clustering to cluster the challenges into what I found to be 3 relatively stable clusters. So the first cluster I nicknamed widespread and frequent. And I interpret these as common tasks that are frequently challenging. So these were finding time to educate myself, finding time to write documentation, and finding time to write code. These got a low proportion of non-applicable and a high proportion of always or frequently. And these were the most popular responses by several descriptive statistics. Cluster 2, I nicknamed select but frequent. And I think these are less common tasks that are challenging to those who face them. So these were securing funding for my open source projects, hiring expert personnel, and finding funding opportunities. And these had a high rate of non-applicable, but those folks who did find it applicable had a high rate of saying always or frequently challenging. Cluster 3, I nicknamed everything else. So I interpret these as moderately common tasks that are challenging with moderate frequency, including, these are the options we gave them to choose from here. So in summary, some challenges affect a lot of people a lot of the time, primarily finding time to write code, write documentation, and to educate themselves. Other challenges affect fewer people, but affect them frequently. We found these were funding and hiring. We also asked our respondents about what solutions would be most useful to them, and particularly, what services might the OSPO offer that would be useful. And again, perhaps unsurprisingly, grants for open source sustainability was a really popular answer. The second most popular answer was access to free, feature-rich computing environments, and a learning community and help finding funding opportunities were also popular. We asked this question a couple different ways, and these were the top 4 responses consistently. So I was kind of interested in this number 2 thing that people wanted access to free, feature-rich computing environments. So I wanted to follow up and ask, was there maybe just one segment of the population who selected that? And the answer, as far as I can see, is not really. So maybe the rate of folks selecting this was a bit higher among undergraduates. We don't have enough of a sample of undergraduates to have statistical power to say whether that's significant. But anywhere from 14 to 30% of all the job categories liked this solution. So it seemed like there was a really broad interest in computing environments. We also asked the aspiring contributors a very similar question, and here's what they said. So in this case, access to free, feature-rich computing environments was number 1. The next most popular by a very close margin was a learning community or discussion group. The third was educational materials, and the fourth was mentoring programs. So in summary, there is widespread interest in grants and other funding support, primarily from the experienced contributors. For the aspiring contributors, funding wasn't as much of a barrier to entry. And in fact, I can go back and you can see that the funding related options are at the sort of the bottom of the list for these folks. We observed high demand for free feature-rich computing environments, and we found that educational materials are likely to be popular with aspiring contributors. We also had a qualitative response box where we asked folks, are there any challenges or solutions that you've been thinking about that maybe aren't on the list we presented? And so I tagged these qualitative comments with themes using sort of qualitative research methods. And I ended up with 3 major themes and a number of minor themes. So the major themes that I found were culture, resources, and infrastructure. And this was interesting to me because our survey instrument really focused on resources and infrastructure. We didn't really ask any questions about culture, but we did get a lot of responses from that qualitative question about culture. So some examples of the comments that were tagged as culture theme. One person said, administrators often fail to understand the value their organization receives and the responsibility to contribute back in kind when their organization uses open source software. Another person said open source software is often discouraged in favor of vendor solutions, even when those solutions would increase cost. And another person said clarity from UC and from campuses about what is allowed to be contributed would be very useful. So in summary, from this qualitative question, we found scarce resources are a challenge, including time, personnel, and funding. And additionally, many respondents had feedback about university guidance, norms, and culture. Particularly, there were requests for clearer guidance, more open source education, including education about open source careers, and calls for more appreciation for the value of open source. So in conclusion, sorry to the folks who just walked in the room. I was told this was supposed to be a 20-minute talk. So in conclusion, 233 open source contributors participated in our survey. We found that the struggle to find time for coding, documentation, and self-education is nearly universal. We found widespread desire for grants for open source sustainability. And we found that robust digital infrastructure is also highly desirable. I would certainly love the opportunity to do more research to figure out exactly what sort of digital infrastructure people wanted, but that was definitely a popular response. And then we also found that students, career academics, and non-research staff can have different priorities. So some of these areas of divergence included interest in funding, interest in educational support and learning communities, and whether open source is sort of extra work or part of their job. So obviously this survey was for us to figure out what we want to do as an OSPO network, but I also think it's useful for universities more broadly. I think this study raises questions for all universities, including what are the university's obligations with respect to open source? How is the university supporting the maintenance of its open source inventions? And does the university consider this part of their responsibilities to maintain the software invented at the university? How is the university supporting aspiring contributors? Are students and staff who want to get involved in open source supported and given the tools to do so? And is the Tech Transfer Office, IT, Library, Office of Research, or OSPO equipped to offer all kinds of support? Is it equipped to offer funding support and digital infrastructure and a learning community and all these things? And more likely than not, these departments will need to work together to provide comprehensive support. So next steps for this study. The manuscript is in progress and we are targeting fall 2025 publication, or at least submission. The de-anonymized data will be shared in a data repository, and a PDF of the survey instrument is already online. If you're like burning with curiosity, you can go to my GitHub repo and check it out. There's also a lot of aspects of this survey that I didn't talk about. So for example, we asked folks for their GitHub usernames if they're comfortable sharing it, and we're going to be doing a survey of their contribution patterns and sort of their, quote unquote best practices. Do they have a README? Do they have a license? That sort of thing. We're also conducting outreach to the respondents regarding having their survey showcased in a software catalog, which Juanita is going to talk about next. And so this is just what I showed you today as a piece of the survey. And that's all I've got for you today. So big thanks to everyone who contributed and to the Sloan Foundation for funding this work. And with that, I would be happy to take questions. I don't know who was first.
I'm curious how much integration there is with the computer science program at UC, in the UC system, with the OSPO. Is that something where there's opportunities for cross-pollination in education, or getting those computer science students excited about not just the capabilities of open source, but also the responsibilities associated with open source?
That's a great question, and I think every campus will give you a different answer. Some of the campus OSPOs are more mature than others. I have personally found it really hard to get in touch with the faculty, probably because they're really busy. And so, yeah, we try to get our emails out on those listservs, and we try to go to their conferences and things, on-campus events. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to do, and I don't know if other folks from the UC OSPO network want to chime in. We have one CS faculty who's involved with the OSPO at my campus at Santa Barbara, and it's invaluable having him to be a part of this and interface with the students. But we definitely have more work to do.
Sorry, I didn't know. It could be on your UCSB. There's one. I think each campus. Well, 3 of the campuses have a CS faculty member who are somehow connected. But yeah, I think it's one of the areas, I think, of the network. 2 of our nodes are, so like my campus and Berkeley are both based in like a CS or data science related department, and then a lot of the other ones are library. And so I think that, and I think we're all trying to like, so we each have kind of role, and part of what our role I feel is to like bring in more of the CS faculty too. But I think it's great because there's a number of, even if it's based on the library like UCSB is, there's also this outreach to CS as well. And I think the education part is we have also a working group on education that is working through all of that as well.
Yeah, where we're at right now is like we're just starting some like community meetups and like an open source club on our campus, and like this is our first like foray into like actually talking to the students about their needs. Yeah.
In the last slide, you mentioned publishing de-anonymized data.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
So we did ask for some personally identifiable information on the survey. So we asked people like, would you like to sign up for our mailing list? If so, what's your email address? So like we're just redacting like the email addresses.
So you mean anonymized?
Yes.
Okay.
That is a mistake.
The data so that it makes people less anonymous?
That is a typo. Yes.
Okay, cool.
No, go ahead. I was just curious, of the findings that you shared, or of the findings that you have, what do you consider to be most actionable for the network?
That's a great question that I feel like I can't speak on behalf of the network.
Are there recommendations for action that you're putting forward to the network?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times the stuff that's easier to do is the stuff that people don't need as much, frankly, in my opinion. Like it's a lot easier to give people advice about licensing than it is to give them funding. It's really hard to give them digital infrastructure. It's a lot easier to do some of these small things, like getting into the IT procurement pipeline and saying, we want to make it easier for you to procure open source. That's super hard. So I think actionable kind of depends on our ambition level. I think the educational resources was in reasonably high demand and it's reasonably actionable. But, that's a network-wide question. I can only speak for myself. I don't know if there are other network people here. They want to chime in. Okay.
So I have one weird question. Can you go back so I can take a picture of the quotes? And then my real question. Sorry. So actually, to what Josh was asking, when I saw the graph of the plunging interest in open source or motivation for open, I actually thought that was going to be where this was going as one of the actionable, to sort of put it in context of what you just said. An actionable thing for the network is identifying the initial motivation and then making the case to the system that we have this initial interest and it's tapering off. Can the OSPO serve to address that? Like, did you notice? And you said there might be other things that you did present from the survey. Was there any indication of what triggered that decline in interest or motivation, of what the difference was, what was happening in year 1 versus, I don't know, I forget the scale, but year 12 or whatever it was?
I mean, it was just one study, so it wasn't like we followed the same person over time. It was just, different segments of the population. The young folks were more interested in upskilling than the old folks.
Oh, I see. So older faculty were less interested in the ISD. It wasn't a trend.
No, it wasn't a longitudinal study where we followed people.
I've seen that before on another survey that I participated in. It was like it went from, it's got like 20 years of data behind it. So exactly what you said.
Yeah. And I think it's my personal experience. There's probably other people in the room with more experience that when I do talk to students, they're very interested in developing skills that they can use in the workforce. Some of them have expressed like frustration that they're like, I have a degree in computer science and I don't know how to use Git. And so I think that's pretty actionable, is helping them develop those skills that they're often really hungry for. Yeah.
So one of their quotes up there, and maybe you covered this earlier, I apologize, I walked in late. Administrators often fail to understand the value the organization receives. That's actually very similar to corporate America too. But one of the things that I'm wondering about is if there would be appetite or interest in the academic environment to partnering with private industry to do things like, say, do a customization to an open source project so that it's more usable for not just that corporation, but the community as a whole, and that a given corporation might be willing to pay for that as like kind of a contract or a research agreement kind of partnership with the university.
Yes, we are interested. Part of what makes that difficult is just that there's no infrastructure for that right now. So we have had some conversations with UC procurement about like, can we create a channel for these kind of public-private partnerships where, maybe when Dell is selling us computers, they can like check a box to be like, hey, I'd be interested in like participating in an OSPO internship program, or we'd be interested in, supporting the OSPO in some way. There isn't an infrastructure for those kinds of partnerships right now. So I think our focus is like building those connections and just getting a case study to show like, hey, there's space for this kind of model that we haven't tried it out yet. But yeah, I think we're very interested in that.
I agree with that comment. I think the one thing there is infrastructure for still, and I think we're building towards what Virginia's talking about, is more for the research. If that was like a research question, that industry and like UC researchers could work together on, that we have an infrastructure for. We just, I think what you're specifically asking about, like adjusting for that, and especially for that first comment, I feel like is something we're work in progress on.
Yeah. And there are still things we need to figure out. Like, we don't want to tell professors that they should be like selling products in their classroom. Yeah. So there's still some, we need to figure out what that would look like.
I have a question.
Okay.
I know we talked about this. I have senior presentation report. Something just came up in my head as I was watching it. We were talking about the numbers being skewed. It was like a ongoing joke within the network about who had the most respondents, and UCLA was like, who's gonna get the T-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
But something hit me. Did we ever like adjust for Canvas size? And I may have asked you this question before. I just forgot the answer. So, but did that ever come into play where we saw? Because I was like, oh, UCLA is the biggest school. It should actually happen. Berkeley has no excuse. They're number 2. They should be higher. Santa Cruz, on the other hand, well, so I feel very good about it.
I decided not to weight the data. It's pretty typical in surveys to weight the data based on, the population proportions. I felt like it was really hard to know what number of IT staff should be the expected, or what number of students should be expected. So I didn't do that. But something to consider.
Better now than I thought. Not as many. But I think it's a really interesting thought about whether we think that each campus, our populations on each campus, whether they're homogeneous, like, so all of the ITS folks are active like that. Actually might be like something we could, like, would be a nice, interesting next step of how each campus's communities within those sectors that you pull out. Anyway, I'm not trying to give you.
Yeah, I mean, I made a choice because I didn't want to present data that was like misleading. I felt like I would rather just show you the raw data, and you can make your own judgments about how generalizable it is. But I did recently, I did a regression model that like does weight the groups equally, and it was really interesting that when I did it that way, interest in a learning community went down. And I think it's because the people felt like they really wanted a learning community were like the IT staff. And they were they were like the biggest group. And so when you weight all the groups equally, like their voice gets dampened. So I think, yeah, there's a big question of who are the people responding and who are the stakeholders we actually want to serve that we should keep looking into. Yeah.
This is more of a general question about the OSPO, but like at U of I, for instance, we have system-wide IT. AITS covers Chicago, Springfield, and Urbana-Champaign. Does the UC system have a similar system-wide IT department, like coordination between the campuses, and does the OSPO interface directly with them at all? Present?
This might also be a Stephanie question.
The University of California has 10 campuses, and each campus has a certain level of autonomy. They're actually pretty snarky about it, and we normally don't play well together. I think that you see actually the OSPO network is one of those situations where all of us get along really well together. But there in the office of the president, there are like overarching like structures. Like there is an CTO for the network for the system. There is a innovation and tech transfer office for the system. And they interact with the campus ones, but there's still a level of autonomy at each campus. The UCOP is trying to get them to work together a little bit better, but each campus is a little bit has their own views on things and how they do it. So there isn't like a common. There are a lot of for a 10 system campus, 10 campus system, we actually have a pretty wide variety of different technologies that we end up using, much to our procurement people's chagrin, when our procurement people are like, if we got everybody to do the same thing, we're probably in a lot better situation. And they're the ones who are actually, like as Virginia alluded to, actually are very interested in maybe getting open source and maybe having the OSPOs play a role. But they're all like, yeah, but then you have to also talk to the campuses. But so, yeah.
That makes sense. AITS at U of I is not very large in comparison to like U of I, UIUC's tech services, IT office. Yeah. Cool.
I mean, for some way, I think also because it's a big state, 10 campuses.
Yes.
There is a reason why autonomy. That's also the OSPO network has a good amount of autonomy between all the nodes as well.
Yes.
We just all get along.
Yep. My experience at UC Santa Barbara is like we can't even get IT together on our own campus. Like we have different IT departments that don't talk to each other as much as they should. So it is a tough challenge. So if there's no more questions, then I'll let you go. And I'll be here if you want to chat.
You have to do it all over again for the second half that you were booked.
Go get a coffee or take a nap or whatever you need to do. All right, thank you for coming.